So this is cellular respiration, and this is the breaking down of glucose, a 6-carbon compound, to get the energy out of it. And there were 2 steps, the glucose to pyruvic acid, and what is that particular step called? Glycolysis. And the other step that energy comes out is called what? The Krebs cycle. And where is oxygen supplied? During glycolysis or the Krebs cycle or both? In the Krebs cycle. This is where oxygen is. And you'll have all of this at the top, right, filled in? Mm-hmm. C refers to the carbons. This is actually step 5. Glucose combines with oxygen. This breaks apart the glucose, releasing energy as ATP and producing CO2 and H2O. Where is more energy produced in this process? Is it glycolysis or is it the Krebs cycle?
Krebs cycle.
The Krebs cycle. Do you see this ATP is a lot bigger than this ATP? And the Krebs cycle needs glucose to get started. That's an important point. And the fatty acids are broken into 2 carbon fragments. When I talked about fatty acids, I said they're anywhere from 4 to 22 carbons long. But they're broken down to 2 carbon fragments. And if there is no glucose, and why might there not be glucose in this cell?
No carbs.
Pardon, what are you saying again? That was right, I just didn't quite hear it.
Low carbs.
Low carb, what do you mean low carb?
In your diet.
In your diet. You know, people aren't eating carbohydrate in the diet. Why else might there not be glucose available for the cell?
Diabetic?
Yeah, a diabetic. You know, somebody where the insulin isn't working to get the glucose into the cell. So without that glucose there, that means the Krebs cycle can't happen. So if we're trying to get energy from fat, that's when the fatty acid goes off into ketones if the glucose isn't there. And ketones are how many carbons in ketones? 4. So when are ketones formed? When there's no glucose in the cell. When there's not enough glucose in the cells. Which can come with not eating foods that give glucose, like carbohydrates, or uncontrolled diabetes. What are the 2 parts of cellular respiration? By now you should know this without...
It says metabolism.
Oh, cellular metabolism. What did I say? Respiration. It's the same thing. And I'm sorry, I sometimes am inconsistent. Cellular metabolism is also cellular respiration. It uses oxygen. What are the 2 parts? Glycolysis, right, Karen, and the Krebs cycle. Aerobic versus anaerobic. What does aerobic mean? Uses oxygen. So which of those 2 steps, of those 2 parts, which part used oxygen? The Krebs cycle. And what part of cellular metabolism / respiration is anaerobic? Glycolysis. And what does anaerobic mean? Doesn't use oxygen. So here is where lactic acid goes. Lactic acid happens when there's not enough oxygen. Where it says, what causes lactic acid? Not enough oxygen in this cell.
Does that happen in exercise?
Yes, and that when you're exercising beyond your lungs' capacity to take in oxygen. So if you're sprinting for exercise or sprinting to class, then none of this happens. And so in that situation, glucose gets converted to pyruvic acid because that can happen without oxygen. And your blood doesn't like pyruvic acid. So it makes that into something it is a little bit happier with, and that is lactic acid.
One way arrow?
Pardon?
The arrow is one way?
It is, in this case, it can go this way, but for lactic acid is actually a two-way too. Because what you can do is take that lactic acid and go the other way, and I think the body actually makes it into glucose first, and then burns that glucose if what is present? Oxygen. So if you stop exercising, which normally you would do, because the lactic acid collects in your muscles, and what does that feel like? Burning, sore.
So just as a review, when our ketones formed, when there's not enough glucose in the cells from not eating foods that give glucose, maybe starvation or maybe anorexia, or uncontrolled diabetes, and when is lactic acid formed? It's formed when there's not enough oxygen, and that might be from sprinting. And then this is just in case you have a few little things that aren't filled in yet.